Welcome to TEA's presentation on dyslexia, Section 504, and multi-tiered systems of support, webinar, and resources. We thank you for joining us. If during the webinar you have a question, put it in the chat box to the right. On the agenda for today, we will start with brief introductions, and we'll briefly discuss what dyslexia is by reviewing how it is defined in the Texas Dyslexia Handbook, look at common characteristics and other related disorders. Next, we will examine how dyslexia, Section 504, and IDEA intersect in supporting students with dyslexia in a multi-tiered system of support. We'll then share a new resource that has been developed called the Dyslexia Essential Components Checklist, along with important supporting resources. Finally, we have a brief preview of a forthcoming dyslexia professional learning course that will enhance the work you do with students with dyslexia. But first, introductions. My name is Dominic Robinson. I am the Division Director within the Department of Special Education Programs with the Texas Education Agency, and I'm the Project Manager for this initiative. Also with me today from TA is Program Specialist Janelle Weber, who is the project lead and contact for this initiative. TA is partnering with the American Institutes for Research, AIR, to develop high-quality technical assistance materials to support LEAs in implementing state and federal dyslexia requirements. This webinar will highlight two of the key resources coming out of this work, the Dyslexia Checklist and the Dyslexia Professional Learning Module. The work is led by Dr. Tessie Rose Bailey and her colleagues, Dr. Sarah Benz and Tracy Long. Dr. Benz is a researcher at the American Institutes for Research, and she will be sharing resources on today's webinar. Say hi.
Hi.
All right, so what is dyslexia? Dyslexia is not caused by laziness, inattention, low intelligence, or social emotional problems. Dyslexia is, however, a brain-based learning disability that makes learning to read, write, and or spell difficult despite adequate instruction and intelligence. You can see here that the Texas Education Code defines dyslexia and other related disorders as a disorder of constitutional origin manifested by difficulty in learning to read, write, or spell despite conventional instruction, adequate intelligence, and social cultural opportunity. Related disorders include disorders similar to or related to dyslexia, such as developmental auditory imperception, dysphagia, specific developmental dyslexia, developmental dysgraphia, and developmental spelling disability. The Dyslexia Handbook describes some of the common characteristics of dyslexia as having difficulty with words in isolation, accurately decoding unfamiliar words, oral reading, and spelling. Students with dyslexia may have challenges with learning the names or associated sounds of letters and holding on to that information in their memory. These students may also have difficulty quickly recalling the names of familiar objects, colors, or letters. As found in the Dyslexia Handbook, Texas state law requires that districts and charter schools identify those students who have dyslexia and related disorders. Some examples of related disorders found in the Texas Education Code are developmental auditory imperception, or difficulty hearing the difference in sounds in words, dysgraphia, difficulty recalling specific words, specific developmental dyslexia, defined as an unexpected difficulty in accuracy or fluency of reading for an individual's chronologic age, intelligence, level of education, or professional status. Developmental dysgraphia defined as an unexpected difficulty in writing, typing, or spelling for an individual's chronologic age, intelligence, level of education, or professional status, and developmental spelling disability. Estimates on dyslexia's prevalence vary. According to the Dyslexia and Related Disorders Reporting Study, it can affect 1 in 10 school children. However, some estimates are as high as 20% of the student population might have dyslexia. As noted earlier, it occurs in all levels of intelligence. While there is no cure, there are several success stories of individuals with dyslexia, such as Steven Spielberg, Richard Branson, and Whoopi Goldberg, just to name a few. Finally, it has been shown to affect comparable numbers of girls and boys. Although more boys are referred for evaluation, This could be a reflection of their behavior rather than their disability. Now that we know what dyslexia is, let's talk about how IDEA, Section 504, and MTSS intersect with students with dyslexia. The Individuals with Disabilities Act, or IDEA, ensures that children throughout the nation with disabilities receive the services they need. Under IDEA, a child is eligible to receive special education services and/or related services if it is determined the child has a disability and the child needs specially designed instruction provided through special education or related services as a result of that disability. IDEA defines specific learning disabilities as a disorder in one or more of the basic psychological processes involved in understanding or in using language, spoken or written, which may manifest itself in the imperfect ability to listen, think, speak, read, write, spell, or do mathematical calculations. Specific learning disabilities, or SLDs, can co-occur with executive function disorders, including ADHD, speech and language impairments, or processing disorders. An SLD can impact oral expression, listening comprehension, basic reading and fluency or comprehension, written expression, and math calculation and problem solving. On the left, you can see the intersection between dyslexia and SLD. When a student with dyslexia is identified to need special education, they are served under the SLD classification. In a Dear Colleague letter from October 2015, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitation Services at the U.S. Department of Education stated that there is nothing in IDEA that would prohibit the use of the terms of dyslexia, dyscalculia, or dysgraphia in an IDEA evaluation for eligibility or in the resulting IEP documents. Some students who are identified with dyslexia may receive appropriate intervention supports and services under a Section 504 plan through a district dyslexia program. This is permissible when it is not suspected that the student requires special education services, or when the student with dyslexia is determined to be not eligible for special education through an evaluation under IDEA. Some students with dyslexia reach a point where direct intervention and explicit skill instruction is no longer warranted, but accommodations to provide curriculum access may be warranted. This is one example when the provision of services under Section 504 may be applicable than services under the IDEA. Teams should carefully consider all of the relevant student data to gauge the level of student impact specific presentation of dyslexia will have on his or her ability to access and make progress in the general curriculum. If it is suspected or known that special education services are needed, the student should not be directed to or first served through Section 504. Multi-tiered systems of support can play an important role in supporting students with dyslexia. When students are struggling with reading or showing early risk factors for dyslexia, they can receive intervention within a school's MTSS model. A referral for a full evaluation can occur at any point in the MTSS process, and it should be noted that MTSS is not required prior to any referrals for special education services. To learn more, you can visit the TA website and read the provision of services for students with dyslexia and related disorders. The link can be found here. Other students who are struggling with reading or showing early risk factors associated with dyslexia may receive interventions through a tiered intervention model such as MTSS. Tiered intervention programs play an important role in providing quick access to research-based interventions for struggling students. These systems also serve as an ongoing support for students whose reading difficulties are not the result of a disability under IDEA or Section 504. MTSS data might also be an important component of the individualized evaluation used by LEAs for determining whether a student has a specific learning disability under the IDEA. However, LEAs must ensure that students in MTSS are carefully monitored and that a timely referral for evaluation under the IDEA is made when, after an appropriate amount of time, the student is not making adequate progress. This referral can occur at any point in the MTSS process, and MTSS is not required prior to any referrals for special education services. MTSS and initiation of initial evaluation can also occur simultaneously. Now, the following resources can be helpful as you look to build or sustain your current MTSS framework. First, multi-tier systems of support is a PowerPoint from a TEA presentation answering questions surrounding the implementation of MTSS in schools. Second, TIER, which stands for Tiered Intervention Using Evidence-Based Research, is a new TEA resource for supporting the use of MTSS and evidence-based practices in both the academic and behavioral settings. TIER will continue to update their website with modules, videos, and other resources to support multi-tier systems of support. Third, the TA Response to Intervention site has frequently asked questions regarding the implementation of MTSS in schools. And fourth, the National Center on Intensive Intervention, or NCII, has numerous resources to support MTSS and RTI implementation, as well as intervention supports for students with dyslexia. NCII has partnered with Texas and 7 other states to build the capacity of the state to support a process called Data-Based Individualization, or DBI. DBI is a process for providing intervention and specially designed instruction to students who struggle. To find out more about NCII or the DBI process, please feel free to visit the website found at the above link.
As mentioned before, TEA is partnering with AIR and Meadow Center to develop high-quality technical assistance materials to support LEAs in implementing state and federal dyslexia requirements. One key resource that has been developed is the Dyslexia Essential Components Checklist. As Dominic mentioned, as a registered participant on this webinar, you were sent a link to an electronic draft of the checklist. It may be helpful to bring that document up at this time as we go through each of the sections. Dyslexia Essential Components Checklist. The checklist contains both procedural and substantive Texas state dyslexia requirements outlined in the Texas Education Code, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, the Texas Administrative Code, and the Texas Dyslexia Handbook. Procedures concerning dyslexia and related disorders. It is recommended that schools or local education agencies develop teams to work together to complete this worksheet. Teams should not view this as part of TEA's special education differentiated monitoring and support process. Rather, teams should use this tool to gather evidence about and reflect on their current dyslexia programming so they can strengthen internal systems and programming. The document is for your internal use only and should not be submitted to TEA. This worksheet contains 6 items that are key for implementing a school-wide dyslexia program: screening, evaluation and identification, instruction, parent-guardian participation, written documentation requirements, and teacher training. To complete the worksheet, teams are asked to consider each component, provide a list of evidence to confirm their implementation of the component requirements, and list any action steps needed to meet or exceed the minimal requirements. A list of resources is available at the end of this worksheet. The first section in the Dyslexia Essential Components checklist is screening. The goal for screening is to ensure procedures accurately identify students who are at risk of having dyslexia in order for the school to provide early identification and intervention. The checklist outlines the state and federal requirements essential for implementing dyslexia screening, as well as the legal source for each listed requirement. For example, it indicates there are specific screening requirements for kindergarten through 2nd grade students, as well as additional requirements for students who are not proficient on the grade 6 STAR testing. The source of that state requirement is provided to ensure teams have the most accurate information. For a complete list of those requirements, check out page 2 of the checklist. Now, you will notice that the checklist lists the program requirements requirements for each component, but does not go into detail about how to address those components. TEA and its partners have released numerous technical assistant resources to support schools and districts in implementing each requirement. A list of resources can be found on page 7 of the checklist. This is not an exhaustive list, and it will be updated over time. In this webinar, we would like to highlight currently available tools and resources to support you in implementing dyslexia screenings. First is the Technical Assistance Child Find and Evaluation Guide. This guide was designed to assist LEAs in meeting their obligations under state and federal laws regarding screening of at-risk students. The Dyslexia Handbook provides additional information about screening with critical evidence-based components to consider. Third, the National Center on Intensive Intervention mentioned previously provides users with a screening tool chart that can be helpful in selecting the appropriate screening tools for your students. Finally, TEA staff shared a presentation as part of its HB 3 and 30 web video series called K2 Diagnostic Tools that provides useful information about early childhood assessment resources. Each of the remaining components of the checklist is structured in a similar way. The goal of the second section is to outline state and federal requirements for dyslexia evaluation and identification. The evaluation and identification of students with dyslexia is multifaceted, and thus it is imperative that schools and districts have systems in place that encourage timely evaluation and identification to provide appropriate intervention. A special note here is that districts should have written procedures for implementation and monitoring of their dyslexia evaluation and identification procedures. These include procedures for early identification, intervention and support, ensuring that identification is made by an ARD committee review or Section 504 committee, and ensure that procedures meet Section 504 or IDA requirements, and that all of this is implemented with consistency across sites. The checklist outlines all of the requirements in this area. Similar to the screening component, page 7 outlines TEA resources to support effective implementation of dyslexia evaluation and identification. Several of these resources were mentioned earlier, including the Technical Assistance Child Find and Evaluation document and the Dyslexia Handbook. There are 2 additional resources to consider. First, you may be familiar with the Dyslexia Identification Academy Dyslexia Foundation. This valuable resource is currently being updated to reflect the 2018 TEA Dyslexia Handbook and will outline the specific procedures to support implementation of dyslexia evaluation and identification. Finally, check out TEA's FAQs for dyslexia and related disorders. This resource, which was released in March of 2019, provides answers to many common questions about dyslexia programming implementation. The goal of the next section, instruction, is to ensure that program instruction and materials used to instruct students with dyslexia are evidence-based and include the components outlined in the Texas Dyslexia Handbook. This includes ensuring that materials purchased or developed must include critical evidence-based components of instruction, procedures and systems for instruction of students with dyslexia are implemented consistently across all sites, and instruction is systematic, explicit, and evidence-based to meet the educational needs of a student with dyslexia. For more information, you can refer to the Dyslexia Essential Components checklist. There are many resources to support you in ensuring students with dyslexia receive high-quality instructional programming. First, the National Center on Improving Literacy provides access to evidence-based resources to teach students with literacy-related disabilities. Here is a new TEA resource to support implementation of MTSS and evidence-based practices in both the academic and behavioral settings. Next, the TEA Dyslexia, Dysgraphia, and Dyscalculia in the IEP provides our team's guidance for writing IEPs for students identified with these specific learning disabilities. And finally, NCII provides an intervention tools chart to support teams in selecting evidence-based interventions for students with dyslexia. Now that you have a good understanding of the structure of the document, I'll briefly review the remaining components. An essential component of dyslexia programming is parent-guardian participation. This includes procedures that are in place to communicate, notify, and inform parents or guardians throughout the process. These procedures must be systematic in nature so that they are implemented consistently across all sites. For example, did you know that districts and schools must inform families of all options, give 5 days advance notice prior to evaluation, provide the Texas Dyslexia Handbook, inform families of their rights under IDEA in Section 504, notify parents of the screening results, and obtain permission to evaluate? Check out the Dyslexia Essential Components checklist for a complete list of requirements. There are many resources to support parent-guardian participation. Some of these resources are designed for parents and guardians of students with dyslexia, such as the Texas State Partners Resource Network, which supports parents and guardians throughout the process of screening through identification and services. SpedText is a TEA-sponsored website and call center that provides information and resources about special education. There are other resources too, like the Dyslexia Handbook and the National Center for Intensive Intervention Parent Resources, which are available in English and Spanish. Those resources are designed to support LEAs in effectively engaging families and guardians in dyslexia programming. TEA has additional parent resources coming soon. The next section covers required written documentation. Similar to parent-guardian participation, it is imperative that schools and districts establish procedures to meet state and federal requirements for documentation and ensure they are implemented with consistency. Specific written documentation includes notice of evaluation, parental rights, consent and eligibility of services. For more information, you can refer directly to the Dyslexia Essential Components Checklist. TEA provides several resources to help schools and districts meet the requirements for written documentation for dyslexia programming. I shared the first two resources, Technical Assistance Child Find and Evaluation Guide and the Dyslexia Handbook, under previous sections, and just want to point out that each outlines guidance in this specific area. Two other helpful resources include the Guidance on Procedural Safeguards Production and Required Documentation, which provides an overview of the required documentation for families and how to properly disseminate these documents, and the new Dyslexia Professional Learning course that is due for release June 2020. You will hear more about that at the conclusion of this webinar. The final section in the Essential Components Checklist is teacher training. All Texas educators working with students with dyslexia must be adequately trained to evaluate, identify, and instruct students with dyslexia and related disorders. Some key considerations include provide ongoing dyslexia training and professional learning activities, ensuring all teachers are trained to administer screeners and evaluation, and ensuring students identified as needing services are provided with a teacher trained in dyslexia and related disorders. For more information, you can refer directly to the Dyslexia Essential Components Checklist. Some resources that can help you address the component of teacher training include resources mentioned earlier, such as the Dyslexia Handbook and the Texas Dyslexia Identification Academy Dyslexia Foundation. Other available resources include the National Center on Intensive Intervention, which has professional learning on designing and implementing intensive intervention in both mathematics and literacy, and the new Dyslexia Professional Learning course, which provides professional learning for teachers working with this special population. I mentioned that TEA will be releasing a new resource called the Dyslexia Professional Learning Course to support LEAs and schools in designing and implementing their dyslexia programming. It is due to be released June 2020. We are excited to share a preview of the upcoming Dyslexia Professional Learning course. The course will be divided into 4 sections. Part 1 will walk LEAs through the Dyslexia Essential Components checklist that we just reviewed. The purpose here is to provide an opportunity to reflect on current dyslexia program design and implementation and identify areas of need. Part 2, Understanding Dyslexia and Program Requirements, will provide learning opportunities to increase your knowledge of dyslexia and program requirements outlined in the checklist. You will also have an opportunity to see dyslexia programming in action. Part 3, Designing and Implementing Dyslexia Programs, will focus on building essential skills necessary to effectively implement dyslexia programming. And finally, in Part 4, Course Assessment, you'll have an opportunity to demonstrate your mastery of the course content. As mentioned earlier, we anticipate that the release of this course will be June of 2020. We will now take a moment to respond to some questions.
Thanks, Sarah. We have received at least a number of questions. We have 2 questions that we've received a few times, so we do want to address those first. The first question is, my copy of the Dyslexia Essential Components worksheet says draft. Is that correct? Yes. At this time, we want to ensure that stakeholders have had ample opportunity to give feedback. We don't anticipate subsequent changes, but we've already received meaningful feedback as a result of our webinar. Number 2, is the professional learning course an updated version of the original dyslexia courses? No, this course comes out of program guidance and will be focused on the dyslexia program requirements. Other dyslexia courses in the past, as I understand, have been about identification and an education of students with dyslexia. This professional learning course will, however, align with the House Bill 3, Reading Academies, and as mentioned previously, the Texas Dyslexia Identification Academy. And with that, and on behalf of TA, we want to say thank you for everyone who attended this webinar on dyslexia, Section 504, and multi-tier systems of support, guidance, and resources.